Good morning. Good morning, everyone, and it's good to see you all here today. So we're starting a new topic. In a sense, all the topics that one discusses when one is talking about the Buddha Dharma are related, and you might even say they're the same. But we'll be talking about a different text. And the text we'll be discussing for the next few weeks is the what's commonly called the Diamond Sutra, the Prajñāpāramitā Vajracchedikā Sutra. Vajra meaning diamond, Chedika referring to cutting. Now, we all think of diamonds as being precious, and that's one sense that one might apply to this title. But I think the sense that is intended is the quality of a diamond that is hard and can cut through virtually any material. Contractors use diamond saws or diamond grinders to cut stone or metal or cement. And what is being cut through with this sutra is delusion, what might be referred to as the veil of Maya or the veils of Maya, those things that obstruct our view, those illusions that arise primarily from the notion of a separate self, from egoism, self-centeredness. So this sutra is intended to cut through those illusions. It was probably composed in the 3rd or 4th century. Purportedly, it was passed down orally from the Buddha, but many believe that these Mahāyāna sutras were composed by factions of the Buddhist community that emphasized certain features of the Buddha's teachings. So that's why I say it was probably composed in the 3rd or 4th century in India by those Buddhist monks who would plant the seeds for the Mahāyāna tradition, of which Zen Buddhism is a part. A couple things about the Diamond Sutra are of interest, possibly. One is that there is a printed text of the Diamond Sutra that is the oldest known dated printed text. And it's housed in the British Museum. And if I can get to this, I'll do so. Oh, there we go. this is an illustration from that text that was printed from woodblock prints in the 9th century. And apparently a wealthy individual in China had commissioned craftsmen, artisans, to do woodblock prints of the entire Diamond Sutra text. And this is one of the illustrations that is included. It shows the Buddha there surrounded by a number of monks and other creatures, other beings of various sorts. The story, I won't dwell on this, but the story of how this text ended up in the British Museum is interesting. There are caves in west central China called the Dunhuan Caves. And there are some rooms of that cave, I guess it's more like a city of caves. Some rooms were sealed off for over 1,000 years. And then in 1900, a Taoist monk called Yang discovered one of these sealed off cave rooms that contained thousands and thousands of manuscripts in just perfect condition because of the temperature and humidity in the cave. It didn't allow for any deterioration. And then about 7 years later, after Wang discovered this trove of manuscripts, and there was a Hungarian-British gentleman named Mark Stein, who was adventurous and was sort of retracing the Silk Road. He was an ethnologist, a linguist, an archaeologist. He was sort of a Renaissance person with an adventurous spirit. And he happened upon this monk who told him about this cave. And Mark Stein visited the cave and was just astounded with all of these manuscripts. And obviously, he wanted to study them more. So whether he bribed the Taoist monk or whether he purchased manuscripts from the Taoist monk depends on what source you look to for information. But in any case, he procured at least 1,000 of these manuscripts and brought them back to the British Museum, where they are currently housed. And actually, one of this particular manuscript, dated, I think, 868 CE, is on display there. So, Professor Stein there is there with the dog, and these are some Sikh and other guides that he depended on to get him with reasonable safety across this desertous trek. So we'll come back to that in just a moment. So the Zen connection with this particular text is primarily through what we refer to as the 6th Chinese ancestor, Hui Neng. And Hui Neng, his story was that he was a a peasant who lived in southern China, rural southern China, and his father died when he was quite young, leaving him and his mother to fare for themselves. So he supported the two of them by collecting firewood and taking it to the market. And one time, when he was in the marketplace, he happened upon a monk that was there reading sections from the Diamond Sutra. And the phrase, supposedly, that he heard that caught his attention and completely captivated him and is attributed to his enlightenment was cultivating awareness, non-abiding. Cultivating awareness, non-abiding. The sense of that is captured poetically in a section from a poem written by Hongzhi many centuries later. The deep source, transparent down to the bottom, can radiantly shine, responding unencumbered to each speck of dust without becoming its partner. Responding unencumbered to each speck of dust, cultivating full awareness without getting caught up, we might say. So, Huineng went on to travel north and go to a monastery where they were teaching the Diamond Sutra, and he became a noted abbot of that monastery and is part of the Zen lineage. So the setting for this, the sutra is relatively short. It does have a tendency to be repetitive. In fact, there are some sections that are absolute repetitions of other sections. So I'm not sure we'll go through each and every section, but the core of it comes out very early on in the Diamond Sutra. Today, we'll just talk about, I'm just wanting to sort of introduce this text, and we'll discuss it in more detail in future weeks. But the setting for the Diamond Sutra is that the Buddha is during rains retreat, when the monks would stay relatively stationary. Most of the year, they were sort of migratory. They would go here and there and talk to people and go on begging rounds in various cities. But during the 3 or 4 months during the year, they would stay in one place. And in this case, they were staying in Anathapindika Park, Anathapindika Park. This park, there was a particular portion of the park called Jetta's Grove that was donated to the monks by a wealthy patron, and it was for their use during the so-called rains retreat. I'll be reading the text, but I want to also talk about the sort of the structure of it, which is that of a dialogue. The Buddha is in dialogue with Subhuti. Subhuti was, we think, a historical figure, one of the 10 primary, or the monks that were closest to the Buddha. And Subhuti was from a wealthy family. In fact, he was related to the person who donated the land for Jetta's Grove. And Subhuti, the name, the Su part is fairly simple. It just means good. And the Buddhi is a little bit more complicated. It can have multiple meanings, but it's along the lines of a good existence, good being, well-being, that sort of thing, Subhuti. And he was noted in the early Buddhist scriptures as being one who practiced through metta meditation. That was his primary practice, was loving kindness meditation. And when he would go on begging rounds in various places, he would always practice metta as he was going from house to house. He would radiate kindness and love to whatever house he went to. And thus he was said to be by the Buddha one worthy of gifts, because he was so generous with his radiation of metta, loving kindness, to himself and others. So with that introduction, we'll start with the first portion of the Diamond Sutra, which I'll read, and then I'm making a few comments along the way. Thus I have heard. At one time, the Buddha was staying in Anathapindika garden in Jetta's Grove in the city of Sravasati. With him was a large gathering of 1,250 monks and bodhisattva mahasattvas. Early in the morning, when the meal time came, the Buddha put on his robe and, holding his bowl, entered the great city of Sravasti, where he begged for food. Having finished begging from door to door, he came back to his own seat in the garden and took his meal. When this was done, he put away his robe and bowl, washed his feet, spread his seat, and sat down, mindfully fixing his attention in front of him. So this introduction here, talking about the setting of the what's to come, and also who was present. This is the way many early Buddhist suttas begin. And one might think that, well, if this were composed, and if they did want it to be considered a direct transmission from the Buddha, they might begin the sutra in this manner in order to make it more convincing. The audience consisted of monks, disciples, people who followed the Buddha around and listened to his teaching, and also bodhisattvas. Bodhisattvas being, as we've talked about, those individuals who are dedicated to awakening, full awakening, not only for their own benefit, but for the benefit of all beings. So the Buddha is making himself available at that time for people to ask questions or to talk with him. And in the next section, we meet Subhuti. Then the Venerable Subhuti, who was among the assembly, rose from his seat, bared his right shoulder, set his right knee on the ground, and respectfully, folding his hands, addressed the Buddha thus: "It is wonderful, world-honored one, that the Tathagata, referring to the Buddha, thinks so much of all the bodhisattvas and instructs them so well. World-honored one, in the case of a son or daughter of a good family who arouses the thought for the supreme awakening, how should they abide in it? And how should they keep their thoughts under control? So, Subhuti, being a longtime follower of the Buddha, may have been asking this question more or less for the benefit of everyone there, and not just for his own benefit, because he probably anticipated to a certain extent what the Buddha was going to say, or perhaps not. The sort of the ritual of bowing, bearing the right shoulder, getting on the right knee, and circumambulating the Buddha. All of that was a tradition that preceded the time of the Buddha, as in India, as a way of showing respect to a teacher. And again, that is included in many, many of the early Buddhist suttas. The Buddha replied, "Well said indeed, O Subhuti. As you say, the Tathagata thinks very much of all the bodhisattvas and instructs them well. But now listen attentively, and I will tell you how those who have set out on the bodhisattva path should abide in it, and how they should keep their thoughts under control." I think as we meditate, at least initially, and recurrently at times, we have this same question: how do we really practice this? How do we keep our thoughts under control, if that is indeed possible? "So be it, world-honored one. I wish to listen to you," Subhuti says. The Buddha said to Subhuti, "All the bodhisattvas, bodhisattvas and great beings who undertake the practice of meditation should cherish one thought only. When I attain perfect wisdom, I will liberate all sentient beings in every realm of the universe, whether they be egg-born, womb-born, moisture-born, or miraculously born, those with form, those without form, those with perception, those without perception, and those with neither perception nor non-perception. So long as any form of being is conceived, I must allow it to pass into the eternal peace of nirvana, into that realm of nirvana that leaves nothing behind, and to attain final awakening." So this is more or less a restatement of the Bodhisattva vow, referring to the archetype of the Bodhisattva as one who is completely interested, completely committed to bringing about awakening for all beings, in whatever way that might be. There are different ways of accomplishing that, and the immense literature of Mahāyāna Buddhism points out in many, many ways that various people have expressed this desire to bring about awakening to others through either their actions or their words or their thoughts. But then the Buddha goes on. You would think, well, that should be the end of that. But that's not the end of what he has to say. He goes on and says, and yet, key phrase, and yet, immeasurable, innumerable, and unlimited beings have been limited. Let me start again. And yet, although immeasurable, innumerable, and unlimited beings have been liberated, truly, no being has been liberated. Why? Because no bodhisattva who is a true bodhisattva entertains such concepts as a self, a person, a being, or a living soul. Thus, there are no sentient beings to be liberated and no self to attain perfect wisdom. So that's the question that Subhuti raised and the Buddha's response. So looking at that response, you can see clearly that it includes a paradox, a contradiction, a linguistic contradiction. And there are many linguistic contradictions in Mahāyāna literature. And I guess I will be interested when we go into the breakout rooms, how that strikes you, whether it strikes you as intriguing, fascinating, whether it strikes you as irritating, confusing, or some mixture of both. We'll go into some discussion of that contradiction next time. I did want to mention, however, this list of concepts of a self, a person, a being, or a living soul. This, I think, is for emphasis, but they do have somewhat different meanings. The self being the Atman, the perspective of a self, of having a fixed, separate self. It's more like a subjective feeling. And then a person is more like the social self, the self that others might perceive or that you think they might perceive. A being, a sattva, is like a separate entity as opposed to part of whole, but not even a part, but just immersed in the whole. And a living soul refers to a kind of essence, an essence of something, of some separate thing having an essence. So the Buddha was wanting to dispel all of that, and stating that a bodhisattva should not harbor such concepts. We'll discuss that more next time. But again, when we go into breakout rooms, if you want to consider aspects of this introduction, but also the notion of paradox and contradiction. We'll go into breakout rooms at this point, and we'll see you back in a few minutes. I really appreciate your being here today, and see you shortly.